It's a winter night in Minnesota, and it could be a winter night in the land of the midnight sun, close to maybe the Montmartre in Copenhagen. But at any rate, we're here in Minnesota, and it's a cold night. Dexter Gordon is warming us up. He, one of the keepers of the flame, the heart of the horn. Dexter, you grew up in a family. Well, your father was a doctor, as I understand it, and he was, on occasion, treating a lot of musicians, like Ellington and Lionel Hampton.
A lot of musicians need treating.
Well, the road is a heavy life, isn't it?
Yeah, you can say that again.
Well, here we are in the mid-continent of the United States. In those growing up years, when your father was practicing medicine and occasionally you would see musicians coming through, who were you listening to and how did you get involved with jazz? Were you really interested in it?
Yeah, well, my father used to take my mother and I to the theater, when the big bands, the big acts would come, Mills Brothers, Other Waters, Duke Ellington, Lunsford, whoever. So, and as you just mentioned, on occasion, a few of these people were his patients, and some of them, like Duke and Barney Bigard and Lionel, I guess, on occasion would come over to the house for dinner. When they were in town, we'd see the show and go backstage, So I guess it did have some kind of influence on me. Because I started listening to music on my own, 8, 9 years old, and by the time I started, got my first instrument, the clarinet, I think, I had several records, used records that I'd bought very economically. Yeah. And so, anyway, when I got my first instrument when I was 13, I had some kind of idea, musical idea of what I wanted to sound like. I was very, very, enthused, interested, about music and to be a musician because that seemed to be a beautiful way of life to me, and actually I still think so.
It's great that you have not lost that spirit. As you were listening in those days, you mentioned the name Jimmy Lunsford. That band always just freaked me out. I don't know what it did to you.
Yeah, it was an amazing band, and it never really got the attention that it should have because it was just excellent. I mean, all the different sections and the group, soloists, Willie Smith and Joe Thomas and Trummy Young and Snooky Young and Cy Oliver was doing the arranging, and the pianist, I can't remember his name, but he did some arranging too, and they had a lot of hits and everything, but somehow they just didn't have the right connections to get hotel jobs and things like that, like Duke and like Cab, which this was difficult, for a black band, but Duke and Cab, they had that kind of connections, but Lunsford, he was kind of a independent style. He just had one manager. There was no real, he didn't somehow get into the organization at that time, so that's why he didn't really get the proper attention that he should have. And actually, what happened is that I guess 39 or 40, Tommy Dorsey hired Cy Oliver, and Cy Oliver started writing all those hits for Dorsey, Marie and Dawn is Breaking and all those things that were big Dorsey hits, and then Sinatra and all that was in there too. So it was similar to the thing with that Fletcher Henderson did for Benny Goodman, because all of Benny Goodman's arrangements were from Fletcher Henderson, King Porter Stomp and all those Stomp and Savoy, all those hits.
Those bands, of course, Lunsford set the tempo for Stan Kenton and his two-beat style in the very beginning, and Cy Oliver really framed and vitalized the Dorsey band.
Right, it made it very, very danceable, very listenable. It added a whole new flavor to the band, and so at that time I would say Tommy Dorsey's band was on a par with Benny Goodman, in name-wise, and of course also Glenn Miller. But those were the three biggest names, I guess, at that time.
And they seemed to impress you.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I was listening to everybody, lucky, because all of that was on the radio in those days, and I was able to pick up a lot of broadcasts from the East, Midwest, because I was in Los Angeles. So that time change, because I was just a kid, I'd have to go to bed around 9 or something, but still, I could get in an hour or two of the Grand Terrace or the Roseland Ballroom or the different places.
Frank Daly's Meadowbrook and 1,000 others. Dexter, you did get in on some of the heyday of the transition between swing and the age of bop. You played 52nd Street, and you certainly must have some fond memories of 52nd Street.
Yes, that was something very, very exceptional. When I think about it and talk about it today, it sounds like some kind of dream or fantasy, because in this one block on 52nd, between 6th and 5th Avenue in New York, in half of the block there were about 10 clubs, 2 or 3 or 4 on one side and 5 or 6 on the other, and they all were jazz clubs, and everybody was there, Tatum, Billie Holiday, Lester, Dizzy Bird, Monk, Ben Webster, Stuff Smith, Sid Catlett, name it, they were all there, and it was just like a dreamland, every night. And I was lucky to, have come up in that time to be able to be there and participate. And
it seems to me, it is true. Yeah, it sounds like a fantasy to have all that jazz condensed in one geographical block, but in a sense, it was a kind of a campus, a learning experience, in every sense of the word. Who were the most impressive teachers, or can you distinguish among them?
No, there's so many. I learned from everybody.
From the pianists and the keyboard artists as well as the reed band.
Right, trumpet players, learn from everybody, because, it's all related, and it didn't matter what instrument, naturally, saxophone player, tenor player, but I always listened to everybody, and like Roy Eldridge, Tatum, Bud Powell, Dizzy. I mean, different drummers. Max, Luke, and Art Blakey. All these people leave a little imprint.
Any way that you could describe one imprint as far as say, the sound and tonality of your playing is concerned, where that might have begun?
Well, basically, Lester Young was my favorite. But like I said, I listened to all the tenor players, Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, Dick Wilson, Herschel Evans, um, alto players, Charlie Parker, Billy Smith, Johnny Hodges, Benny Carter, but my style, is basically coming out of Lester, telling the stories and with that kind of a musical philosophy, and which I think is, the real meaning.
And when you refer to musical philosophy and telling stories, is it the lyrical line? Is it the melody that you lay down, the way you alter things and alter the melody and the patterns?
Yes, all those ingredients to make it fit.
Sounds like you're a chef, sir. I'm speaking with Dexter Gordon. Dexter, one contrast against that fantasy we sometimes can't recall. It was a dream. No, it was actuality. 52nd Street. The juxtaposition is Copenhagen, and it's Sweden, and it's Denmark, where you spent time teaching young people as well as performing. What about the European climate and the attitude of the European?
Well, like I was saying before, when I first went over there, it was the first time, and I found it to be very, very interesting. Um, the respect, uh, given to artists and even jazz musicians. That was the first time because in America, to be a jazz musician is to, or was at that time, to be pretty weird. But over there, they give you a lot of respect as an artist, creative and socially as a human being, not some kind of nut. And I found that very heartwarming. So during the years, I've come back a few times to the States, but I never really felt that it was time to come back until of recent vintage, where things seems to have improved and changed. The interest in music and socially, and so it seems like I'm back to stay.
Environmentally, you mentioned there is a change socially as well as from a creative and artistic standpoint. And that's what you really sense.
Yes, I really do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Well, I know you had said you always, still had that enthusiasm. You didn't say it that way about the art form that you're involved with. How is it now as contrasted to yesterday? Is the fire burning as bright inside?
Well, there are a few more ashes there, but it's still it's still burning. It's well, it's my life, and I can't see any other way of of living or being.
And being is the word. Well, whether you're a painter or a musician or any practicing professional, I think it just takes, what is it, some sort of dogged determination and desire in keeping that flame burning.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean, it's there. It's not something that you have to really work on, you know. I mean, if it's there, it's there.
Dexter Gordon, thank you very much for letting me probe on an intermission when usually it's time to recharge the batteries for the next run.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you in the middle of Minnesota.
On a cold winter evening. Dexter Gordon on intermission at the Longhorn Music Hall.